All right, well, we're going to get started, and the meeting is being recorded. So let me introduce you, and we will get going.
Okay.
Hello, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to our session. My name is Brandon Weesey, and I will be the host for this session. We are excited to have Dr. Stephanie Hartberg join us. Her presentation today is titled Defining Employee Engagement for Frontline Retail Workers, Clarifying the Construct for Implementation and Measurement of Engagement. Do remember that we have the chat box open, so be sure to ask any questions that you have for our presenter. And Dr. Hartberg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brandon. Now, this is kind of difficult for me because I am following a very, very successful person in Dr. Stein. She's a tough act to follow, but what I'm doing today is presenting my original research, which was a qualitative study. So it was great to be able to follow Dr. Stein because after discussing the type of study that qualitative is and all the ramifications it is of conducting grounded theory research or qualitative research, it's nice to actually see a study like that that's already finished. Now, my study is on employee engagement in frontline retail workers. And let's see. It may not be relevant to some of the people who are attending this conference, but I really want to point out that we are actually all impacted by the low engagement numbers among frontline retail workers. The retail industry is the largest employment sector in America, and an estimated 42 million people are employed in retail right now. More than half of the people employed in retail are frontline workers, and these are the people that have direct customer contact. So frontline retail workers are the ones who are doing the sales, they're running the cash register, and they're stocking the shelves. These are the people that you as a customer are encountering every day. Unfortunately, retail also has the least engaged workforce in all industries in America. Frontline retail workers are the least engaged across all industries. So employee engagement is a problem, but employee engagement is worse in the retail sector among frontline employees than it is anywhere else. And you might be thinking, okay, so what is employee engagement? Why should I care? What is this all about? But first of all, low employee engagement is correlated with decreased sales, understaffing, diminished organizational performance, employee theft, and employee turnover. Every time a frontline employee quits, it costs the retail organization approximately $3,400 to hire and train a replacement. What's happened is that as a result, the retail industry is facing a retail apocalypse. And maybe this is a term that some of you have heard. I don't know if you have. But retail is facing the worst financial situation it ever has in the history of the country. A total of 35 retailers filed for bankruptcy in 2017, which equates to more than 5,000 stores. And another 3,600 stores are predicted to close in 2018. Numerous retailers are filing for bankruptcy. Retailers are holding extensive debt, and we don't know what to do about it. Retailers are trying to close up their businesses. They're trying to shut down. They're trying to reduce the number of stores and try to channel money into stores that are making more money for them. But the problem might actually be the low employee engagement numbers. And that's the reason I conducted this qualitative study. I wanted to understand employee engagement and how it influences frontline retail workers. Why should you care? Well, when you go to a store, if you have low employee engagement, you might get poor service if you get any service at all. Your favorite salesperson might quit and might work for another employer. Stores with low employee engagement look messy and you can't find what you're looking for. Stores that have low employee engagement may handle the financial burden of employee engagement by reducing product lines or reducing the number of services that are available to you, which means when you go to a store, you don't find your favorite products, and you don't have access to services anymore. Your favorite store could possibly close or go out of business altogether. And then the economy takes a hit with reduced customer spending and increased unemployment because there are fewer retail jobs available. Low employee engagement among frontline retail employees affects all of us. And the problem isn't going to go away. Employee engagement is only at 32% in America. 32% of employees in the entire country are estimated to be engaged, and the remaining 70% are either not engaged or actively engaged with their jobs. In 2017, the employee engagement levels dropped even lower for the first time in 5 years. To clarify what I'm talking about, I put a slide here so that you can see what it means to be engaged. And I probably don't need to explain that too clearly. We know what an employee looks like who cares about their job. They want to help you. They greet you. They come up to you and ask you what you need. How can they help? They're enthusiastic. They're innovative. They take initiative. And they are achievement-oriented. But then you've got the not engaged employee. These are the people who don't take initiative. They're there to collect a check, and they meet minimum standards only. But worse yet is the actively disengaged employee. These are the employees who undermine the organization, don't like their work, they're negative, and bring everybody down. Now, collectively, not engaged and actively disengaged employees account for 70% of employees in America, and most of them are in retail. It's not surprising anymore why the retail industry is in a hurt bag. But here's the conundrum. Retail leaders know they need to create engagement. They know they need to become familiar with how engagement feels. They need to be able to recognize engagement when they see it, and they need to know how to assess it. But here is the theme of my dissertation and the gist of my problem statement in my research study. There is a multiplicity of definitions, measures, conceptualizations, and theories of engagement. But we need to have a specific definition because careful conceptualization of constructs precedes any operationalization. What that means in simple terms is right now there are many, many ways that employee engagement is defined and therefore many ways that it's measured, but nobody really knows for sure what they're talking about when they're talking about employee engagement. So the purpose of my study was to find a definition of employee engagement and to find one that is specific to frontline retail workers. Without a consistent and established definition of employee engagement, we have had researchers and professionals drawing on theories of employee engagement that are not supported by theory, and they're open to subjective interpretation. This has limited the practical application of employee engagement and led to disparity in what engagement research reports to measure. In addition, interventions designed to increase engagement cannot be assessed and they cannot yield measurable results. So even if people try to generate an effective employee engagement strategy, they can't, because ultimately they don't know what they're measuring, they don't even know how to define what they're measuring, and in the end, they don't even know what it is they're talking about exactly. It's an ambiguous construct. Again, my study was to try to make that ambiguity more clear. We kind of talked about this already here. So what I did after coming up with this significant problem and identifying that we have a real issue of defining employee engagement in the research, I generated one primary research question and two sub-questions. I want to point out that this is a pretty typical way of handling a qualitative study. You want to have limited questions and you want to keep them pretty simple. So I had basically one question, and that is, what is the theoretical definition of employee engagement among frontline retail workers? And under that, I wanted to know the factors that are most likely to generate employee engagement among frontline retail workers. And I also wanted to know the factors that were the least likely to generate employee engagement behaviors in frontline retail workers. Now, to answer these questions, I devised a qualitative study using grounded theory in which I generated a questionnaire. The questionnaire had 5 multiple choice questions, and the remaining were open-ended questions for a total of 30 questions. I posted these questions in the form of a questionnaire onto Amazon MTurk, and they answered through SurveyMonkey. And I had a total of 13 people respond to this survey in which they answered all kinds of questions about what kind of manager do you like? What kind of manager don't you like? How do you feel about customer service? What matters to you at your job? What doesn't matter at your job? There were just all kinds of questions exploring how frontline retail workers felt about their job. The fun part was that I got the results really quickly. It was like 2 days. So if you're thinking about using Amazon Turk and or SurveyMonkey, go for it. It was inexpensive, fast turnaround. Now the results were fascinating. I did not expect what I found, but I got factors that are most likely to generate employee engagement, and I also found the factors that were the least likely. But what happened was I didn't get a nice compact definition of employee engagement. What I got was a model that generated 6 thematically interconnected domains, and each domain represented a factor or cluster of factors that when experienced are likely to generate employee engagement behaviors. This resulted in the development of the Frontline Retail Worker Employee Engagement Model. And you can see it here. What I found is that employee engagement can't be defined in 1 sentence or 2. Employee engagement is actually the involvement of different domains, including, as you can see here, leadership, customer service, performance, relationships, influence, and compensation. And underneath each one of those domains is a cluster of factors that contribute to each one of these domains. What I did was I developed a percentage to determine how much of each one of these domains influences employee engagement. And what I found is that leadership and all these factors listed under under leadership are the most likely to generate employee engagement. Factors related to customer service, of course, came in second, and then performance and so on. What was also interesting was that compensation, including benefits, incentives, and wages, were the least likely to elicit employee engagement behaviors. So it was fascinating. Paying people more money isn't going to give them an incentive to be engaged. Things like positive customer interactions, respect for family and flexible scheduling, getting information about the organization, positive management and respect and training, responsibility and trust, those things are more likely than any other combination of factors to generate employee engagement. Like I said, that was not what I was expecting to find. I summarized all of that here, where you can see from most to least, the factors that are most and least likely to influence and elicit employee engagement behaviors among frontline retail workers. The definition then, and the answer to my research question was, employee engagement among frontline retail workers is theoretically defined as the outcome of 6 domains of behavior. Now, if you're wondering how I calculated those percentages, I simply tallied the number of responses included within the data set, which was a total number of 307 responses. Then I took out the number of responses that related to each domain. So I tallied the number of responses that related to customer service, leadership, and so on, and divided them by the total number of responses to determine what percentage of the total number of responses each represented. That's how I came up with those percentages. And you can see the percentages do not add up to 100%. That's because there is an overlap in the cluster variables that represent each domain. You would find this in a qualitative study because of thematic interconnectedness. And according to Strauss and Corbin, who are the experts on qualitative research, variations in form are still representative of a single process. And that's what these domains are. The variations that are represented in the domains still represent a single process, which is employee engagement. So this is the part that I think is absolutely the most interesting. How does it work? The domains that I discovered in the research results can be used as a guideline. When you're developing an employee engagement strategy, you can take one look at the model and know that when you're developing strategy, each domain has to be addressed. You also can look at the model and know where you need to put the most emphasis on your employee engagement strategy development. Clearly, you're going to place your emphasis most on leadership variables and the least emphasis on compensation tools. Okay. Retail leaders can use this model to assess their own organizations prior to developing engagement strategies. So any organization that's associated with retail can start out with that model, take one look at it and say, okay, these are the areas that represent employee engagement. Where is my organization going wrong? By going under each cluster of variables in the domain, you can assess, am I giving my employees trust? Am I giving them responsibility? Am I showing respect for their families? Am I giving them flexible schedules? They can actually assess where they're making it and where they're not. And when they're developing employee engagement strategies for their own organization, they know where they need to place the most emphasis on their change and behavior modification. It can also be used as an assistive device for determining how to modify undesired behavior. For example, if you were to look at leadership again, you can look at an employee and say, is it really the bad behavior? Or is it more of a result of management failing to do their part? The model can be used to assess employee performance, assess where the breakdown was, and then it can be used to determine where do we need to make the changes. So I'm going to go back here. The part that I really think was exciting was that the model can be used to stimulate the conversation needed to address behavioral change. And the model depersonalizes correction. It makes coaching for improvement about behavior and not the worker, because you're just looking right at the model and saying, we need to talk about these behaviors without having to go and talk about the employee as a personal attack on their personalities, or how they may be outgoing or not outgoing, or they may be shy and not approaching people. It's just all about behavior. Then once the strategy is developed, then we can use the model to measure the success. If an organization sees that employees are increasingly becoming more engaged, then we can know that the model is working and that the strategy is working. You can even break down and see by looking at the model which areas they're being successful in. You can look, are we being successful in addressing customer service? Are we successful in addressing leadership? If we're meeting those criteria under each domain, then theoretically you're successfully engaging your employee. What's interesting is that it's possible that engagement may improve in one area but not another. And the tool can be used to assess which domains are being addressed and which ones are not. The model can also be used to assess individual or group engagement behaviors by evaluating the behaviors and the resulting engagement outcomes. And I really want to emphasize, you're going to know if the employee engagement model is working because you're going to see a change in engagement outcomes. If behavior changes, then the model is working and being used properly. If you're not seeing change, then you can go back to the model and say, where are we not making it, and using it to assess where the weaknesses were. Finally, I thought this was an interesting study for me because, for one thing, it didn't turn out like I expected. I thought I was going to have one nice, neat, compact little definition of employee engagement that would just say, all right, this is it. It's not. But what I found was that the concept of employee engagement is actually very complex. But by using this research that I did, it could theoretically be modified for application to other industries to generate employee engagement models that are specific to those different industries and different worker populations. I think also the model could have practical applications for workers in other industries that demand public service, just as it is. I think the model might be flexible enough that it can be modified according to different industries that are also involved with public service, such as healthcare, hospitality, education, and office administration. Because this is all about helping people and providing a service on some capacity. With some minor modifications to the model, I think that we could still define employee engagement similarly, but with specific criterion for each industry. So just to summarize, I felt that the research questions were answered because I did generate a definition of employee engagement, which was specific to retail, but it was actually found to be a lot more complicated than I had anticipated. And I also want to put a plug in for qualitative research. This design was really fascinating because it worked so well for generating new theory. This is exactly what we were trying to do with this research, and we did generate a theory that was practical and useful. And so if you are somebody who's still looking at doing research, still developing your study, this is a great tool because of the flexibility. I love grounded theory. I love qualitative research. And what's interesting too is Dr. Stein had talked about how some people are afraid of statistics. I still was able to work some statistical data into this qualitative research, which is simple inferential statistics by developing percentages. And look at the impact that we were able to get with just developing simple percentages of responses. So if you're thinking about wanting to do qualitative research and you're not sure it's really going to be very specific, you can still work in some statistics. But that's pretty much it. I think I've talked a lot about employee engagement and frontline retail workers. Now, if anybody has any questions, I'm certainly open to it.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hartberg. And yes, please do ask your questions, post them in the chat box, and I will give a few moments for that. One question that came to my mind, and you'll have to forgive me if you mentioned this early on in your presentation, but in your research, did you come across any data or differences in companies that provide their customer service through an online format or sort of a remote setting? So we're thinking about retail as we get closer to Black Friday and the holiday rush, and so a lot of our shopping is done online. Did you come across any data or interesting outcomes from employees who work in an online space?
I only concentrated on Frontline. So online was completely separate. And the reason being, I had a slide early on, which I kind of glossed over. E-commerce only constitutes about 8% of total retail sales. And that's really significant because people wanted to blame e-commerce for destroying the brick and mortar stores. And with 8% of total retail sales, we can know that that's not the problem.
Fascinating.
It is actually.
Great. Yeah. Again, if anyone has any questions, please post those in the chat box. We'll have another 5 minutes or so that we can discuss. But Dr. Hartberg, do you have any concluding thoughts as we wrap things up?
I have to admit that I'm sorry to see my dissertation end. I really am. I loved it. I was very passionate about it. And I'm very passionate about retail workers. I worked as a retail worker for 10 years. I did retail management before I went into mental health, and I still miss it. It's wonderful. So I hope I can share that passion and that compassion for retail workers with all of you, because even if you didn't work retail, when you see them, especially this holiday season, please be kind. They work hard.
Very, very true. And as you said, that one question did come to mind. Did you, as you were doing your research, did you come across any particular companies or organizations that seem to be getting it right in terms of how they handle employee engagement in the workplace?
Yes. Starbucks is one, because they are actually offering benefits to part-time employees, and they are also extremely flexible with their scheduling. So they give people time off for family, and they do that for mothers and fathers. So Starbucks in particular was a very good one that I came across.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wonderful. Well, we want to thank you very much for your time and your leadership in this session, Dr. Hartberg. And to everyone who joined us on the call, thank you for being here. We still have more sessions to come with TLC, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.